brutal combat, haunting world design, existential and occasionally funny dialogue, GRIME is just an all-around fascinating, if occasionally frustrating take on Metroidvanias, a genre both beloved and bemoaned for its ball-busting boss fights and backtracking. GRIME certainly checked both of those boxes when it launched in August last year, and now it gets a free DLC. Colors of Rot, which launches on December 15th and adds new weapons, abilities, and music for you to love, and new enemies, bosses, and environmental hazards for you to loathe. But before diving headfirst into my spoiler-free thoughts on the new content, let's presume you, like I until last week, have either never played GRIME or could at least benefit from a brief refresher. As protagonists go, GRIME follows in the soulsy footsteps of former Metroidvanias and giving you control of a mute brute who seems perfectly content to destroy/absorb everything in sight with nary a second or maybe even first thought. This genre dynamic is not lost on the strange, cryptic, and quirky denizens of GRIME Land, and no, that's not the world's real name, as they will either worship or despise you for your destructive ambitions and literally chiseled bod. In my opinion, GRIME's plot is a little too one-dimensional to call a strength, though that's not to say it's an uninteresting journey, as the game's well-constructed and unsettling world is drenched in tragic, fascinating lore. GRIME's characters, meanwhile, inject much-needed life into this strange and unforgiving realm, but there are only a handful of them and they're rarely on screen. When they are, they deliver interesting text-based dialogue that flirts with the philosophical, but again, there's not much of it to go around. What there is much of is combat. GRIME's stamina-based combat is as intricate and infuriating as genre fans would expect. You're given well over a dozen melee weapons, some of them living, and they vary considerably in terms of range and attack speed. Grime Boy, again not the real name, rounds out this violent armament with a number of ranged items and buffs, though your most useful attack isn't an attack at all, but rather an enemy-absorbing parry that grants you breath, the resource used to heal, as well as mass, the game's currency.
I'm cultivating mass! Stop saying that!
Last and probably least, the more you hurt without getting hurt, the more ardor you'll gain, which grants you more mass on kills, but who are we kidding? This game never stops hurting you. Which makes me a masochist, I suppose, because I thoroughly enjoyed GRIME's intense combat, even if it felt like some fights were more so against the stingy stamina bar than anything else. The game's non-combat platforming sections, meanwhile, are a nice change of pace, though that's not to say they're simple. Far from it, as the sequences here will demand increasingly more from you as you steadily accrue more movement-based abilities. How, you ask? By killing bosses, of course. GRIME has some of the best and hardest boss fights I have ever seen in a 2D game. Their designs are awe-inspiring, their multi-stage movesets are daunting, and mastering each is a deeply rewarding experience. Such a shame then that GRIME's clunky, unhelpful UI and dubious playability often spoil the fun. Inconsistent hitboxes, tedious world traversal design decisions, an absurdly punishing respec penalty that discourages experimentation, and the occasional game-breaking bug were all things I would have expected to see cleaned up by the Colors of Rot release. That said, the DLC's new area, Childbed, is seamlessly integrated into the main game's story and world, and it adds several new hours of value to an already reasonably priced title, not to mention gives players the ability to fight old bosses after beating the game. In other words, faults considered, there's never been a better time to grime. Finally, a few words on style. While some textures lack detail and some animations are painfully jumpy, I still enjoyed GRIME's surreal visual presentation. The environments are memorable, the color palette is fresh, the lighting is occasionally stellar, and I've just never seen anything quite like it. Can't say the same for the game's music, however. While very well done and by no means a weakness, I'm just personally getting tired of frantic choirs and hard games. Feels a bit cliched at this point. Luckily, GRIME's sound design does more to create a sense of individual identity, as the game is dripping in an alien sonic ambiance. In the end, and after averaging up our micrometrics, GRIME and its new DLC get an aggregate megascore of 3.43 out of 5 and are well worth your time. As always, this is Scope, and thanks so much for watching.